I recently acquired a certain exotic class item role that I find to be one of the strongest in the game for Warlocks. That role is Spirit of Inmost Light and Spirit of the Swarm. This combo, along with the overall build, allows you to summon a green army of Threadlings while staying alive, spamming abilities, and controlling the battlefield. What's up, Guardians? My name is Novers, and welcome back. Or if you're new, welcome into the channel. Hope you enjoy this video. Let's jump straight into the build. Starting off, we'll be using two weapons in particular with this build to make it perform optimally. The first one is Quicksilver Storm. Specifically, Quicksilver Storm has a catalyst that allows you to change the weapon type to Strand and also generate tangles with final blows from the Quicksilver Storm grenades. This is great for this build because of the Inmost Light Swarm combo, more specifically the Swarm part. This perk allows you to create Threadlings from breaking or throwing tangles. Also, Spirit of Inmost Light is the center of ability synergy here, as it allows you to empower your other abilities when using an ability. This increases your grenade and melee energy by 400%, class ability by 25% at 1 stack, and 800% grenade and melee and 50% class ability at 2 stacks. The second weapon we'll be using is Versus Velocity Baton, which we will discuss more about later. Now, let's move straight into the subclass. Now, let's start off with the super. I like using Needle Storm with this build to play into the Threadling spam fantasy, as well as having the ability to kill huge droves of adds in seconds. If you'd rather run something else, I recommend using Nova Bomb Cataclysm, as it's a very high damage super that's great for taking down single beefy targets. For the class ability, we're going to be using Phoenix Dive here for the shorter cooldown and movement. We'll also be using Arcane Needle for 3 different melee charges, as well as the strand damage, which we will talk about momentarily. Next is the heart and soul of this build, the Threadling Grenade. This allows you to throw 3 Threadling projectiles into the battlefield upon use. Our first aspect is Feed the Void. Feed the Void stacks with Demolitionist on Versus Velocity Baton to generate a ton of grenade energy, allowing you to spam Threadlings everywhere. Now, Feed the Void allows you to get Devour. Now, with this aspect, you'll be getting the Enhanced Devour variant, which restores full health on each kill and also lasts for 10 seconds. This also grants between 15 and 40% grenade energy on each kill, depending on the tier of the enemy. Next is Weaver's Call, which is the main reason I'm using Phoenix Dive. This allows you to activate your class ability to weave 3 Threadlings and deploy any Threadlings you have perched. Also, targets defeated by strand damage have a chance to generate a perched Threadling. Now, Phoenix Dive is going to allow you to quickly dive down in a near-death scenario, instantly regenerate your health, as well as deploy any perched Threadlings. Now, let's get started with the fragments. The first fragment is Facet of Protection. While surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage. While Transcendent, the effect is increased. Now, specifically, this gives you a 15% damage resistance within 15 meters of 3 enemies. Next is Facet of Balance, which reads, rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy, and rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage grants grenade energy. Proccing this fragment grants you 10% melee or grenade energy respectively. This works very well with Spirit of Inmost Light to give you an even quicker regeneration for each of your abilities. Next is Facet of Awakening. Rapidly defeating targets with light or darkness damage or super final blows generates an elemental pickup of the matching damage type. In this case, it will be a Tangle since it is Strand. Next is Facet of Purpose, which is completely determined by what super you are currently running. Picking up an Orb of Power grants either Amplified, Restoration, Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or Overshield based on the damage type of your equipped super. Now, in my case, it would be Woven Mail, as my super is Strand. However, if you were using something like Nova Bomb, you would get Void Overshield, and all the other buffs are respective to their damage types. For the final fragment, we have Facet of Devotion. Defeating targets afflicted with stasis or strand debuffs grants bonus light transcendence energy. Specifically, defeating rank and file enemies gives 1%, elites give 3%, and many bosses or above give 5%. Now, let's move on to the artifact perks. Firstly, we have Overload Breech-Loaded Grenade Launcher, which is going to pair well with Versus Velocity Baton, which will allow you to stun Overload champions with this weapon. Next, we have Rapid Impacts. Dealing damage with a grenade launcher temporarily increases the reload speed of grenade launchers. This grants you up to plus 30 reload speed at 5 stacks. Next, we have the Thick of It. Rapid final blows while surrounded grant you armor charge. This is another method of easily collecting armor charges to be able to utilize grenade kickstart, which we will talk about in just a moment. Next, we have Concussive Reload. Using a grenade launcher to damage a boss, damage a champion, or break a combatant shield weakens them. Now, this is great, as this will allow us to weaken tons of different combatants on the battlefield, as Versus Velocity Baton is one of the main weapons in this build, so we will be using it a lot, thus weakening tons of enemies. Next is Curative Orbs. The first time you break a target's shield or break the shield of a guardian using their super, you create an orb of power. Now this combines with attrition orbs to generate you a boatload of orbs of power. The final artifact perk we're going to be using is only the second part of Served Cold. Picking up a Void Breach grants you melee energy, which we will be generating via the Synergy weapon mod on Versus Velocity Baton. Now for the tonics, there aren't any tonics that specifically you need to run for this build. However, I do like running the Refined Tonic of Weakening Void. This reads, while Devour is active, special ammo void weapons deal bonus damage. Now this is great as you're going to have Devour up essentially 100% of the time with this build. It also boosts the power from pain, rapidly defeating weakened combatant spawns of Void Breach, and concussive reload. Using grenade launchers to damage bosses, champs, or to break combatant shields automatically reload stowed weapons. Now let's move on to the armor mods. Firstly, we have heavy or special ammo finder, as well as special ammo or heavy ammo scout, and a strand siphon. For the arms, I like to use firepower, grenade kickstart, and bolstering detonation. Now bolstering detonation is really important as your class ability isn't going to be generated too frequently compared to your grenade and your melee, so this is a great method of getting more class ability energy as you will be getting a ton of grenade energy. On the chest piece, as usual, I recommend running 3 damage resistance mods pertaining to the threat of the activity. On your legs, run Innervation, Recuperation, and Elemental Charge. Elemental Charge is going to be procced a lot with how many tangles you'll be generating. Lastly, on your class item, we'll be using Bomber, Powerful Attraction, and Reaper. Now, there are a few stats that I recommend prioritizing for this build. Firstly, we have tier 10 Resilience, which I recommend for any PvE build as it will give you the highest tier damage resistance possible. Next is Discipline, which I also would recommend trying to get to tier 10, as even though we will have Devour and Versus Velocity Baton with Demolitionist, it is still important to get that extra few seconds of grenade regen, as that can be the difference in more high-level activities such as Grandmasters. Next, we have Recovery for your Phoenix Dive. I recommend getting this to at least tier 8, as a big part of Recovery is health regeneration, which you won't need that much with Devour. Lastly, we have Strength, which also getting that to tier 8 or above would be great, as your melee really isn't played into in terms of armor mods with this build, so I would recommend trying to get that higher. Now, throughout the video, you've seen B-roll gameplay in the background showing footage of the gameplay, but I just wanted to explain how you use this build to its full potential. With this build, you want to be spamming Versus Velocity Baton quite a bit and using your grenade to proc Demolitionist and reload it. That way you won't really have to reload Versus Velocity Baton a lot, allowing you to shoot more shots around the battlefield. Also, I would recommend using your class ability and your melee as much as possible to get Heart of Inmost Light or Spirit of Inmost Light, in this case, procced very frequently. Also, during dead periods with your Versus Velocity Baton, I recommend using Quicksilver Storm and prepping grenades as well as shooting them to generate tangles. Breaking or throwing these tangles will allow you to generate even more Threadlings along with all the other ones you're already generating from your grenade class ability and more. Now, as for the super, I personally like using the super mainly just to kill really beefy single targets, but if you'd rather use it whenever you want, it really doesn't matter. It just depends on the activity. Now, if you were in a raid or dungeon per se, I would save the super for damage, but in an activity like Contest of Elders or a Grandmaster, I would be using my super as much as possible, as you will be getting it pretty frequently, as you will be getting tons of damage over time with your Versus Velocity Baton. Well, Guardians, that just about wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed, comment down below green. Also, hit the subscribe button with the post notification bell so you don't miss any future Destiny builds, damage chests, and more. Dropping a like also is free, and it just takes one button, and it helps me out a lot, especially in the algorithm. Also, comment down below any builds you'd like to see, any feedback, or more. Have a great rest of your day, Guardians, and peace.